we have an exciting announcement for you. You are invited to join We're Moving to Europe's brand new community when it launches August 5th. We've been building this community for you if you're curious and or serious about understanding your options for moving to Europe. You'll get exclusive access to expert insights, supportive and productive conversations with other members of the We're Moving to Europe community, and we're putting together new courses and resources every month on topics you need to know about to find your path to living in Europe. So join us at we'removingtoeurope.com and get ready to take the next steps on your path to Europe starting August 5th. We can't wait to see you there. Hello, hola, y bienvenidos. Welcome to this episode of We're Moving to Europe, a podcast for Americans who are curious and or serious about relocating to a European country. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. My young adult children and I all moved from Texas to different countries in Europe over the past few years, and my hope now is to help other Americans who want to move to Europe to plan and execute their research effectively, so you can find the right fit without stressing out, wasting money, or losing time. Today, we're talking with Chanoa Inez. She's an author, copywriter, and marketing strategist who used to live in Serbia and in Montenegro, and she's now based in Los Angeles. Her upcoming book is called Dream On: How to Create the New Life of Your Dreams After Upheaval or Loss, and that comes out in June. Welcome, Chanoa.
Hi, Casey. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for joining us. I'm super, super excited to talk to you. So you live in the U.S. now, but almost 7 years ago, you were living in Montenegro, which for people who don't know, and I had to look it up when I first heard about it from you, it's a beautiful, small Balkan country on the Adriatic coast. Your experiences there and the lessons you learned from them, both the incredibly painful and the positive, form the foundation of your new book. So can we start with why you moved to Montenegro and what happened when you arrived?
Sure. So, to make a long story a little bit shorter, I was just never satisfied living in Miami. I loved living in the US, but, I moved to South Florida with my family as a child, and I was never really ready to leave. I was kind of from a small town, well, not that small, but in Westchester County, New York. So it was a little idyllic, my upbringing. I had the same friends since birth, and all of our families were close, and it was just a completely different lifestyle moving to Florida. So I stayed there until, I was a young adult by then. I just knew I would leave. It was a matter of time, but I didn't know where. So at some point, I started dating my boyfriend at the time, and he was from Montenegro. He was living in Miami, but, he would travel back to Montenegro frequently, and, he just still had this love for spending time in his country. And I already knew about Montenegro. I had some friends from the Balkans, but the more I heard about it, I just couldn't wait to go. So I went there on vacation, and I just fell in love with it. It was really hard to get back on the plane. So we made a mutual decision to go back the next summer for the entire summer with the option of staying permanently. I just started my freelance copywriting business. At the time, it was a side gig. So the plan was, okay, next year I'll be rolling that out to be full time to align with this move. And he was a merchant marine captain turned yacht broker. So it was kind of perfect for him there. Had a lot of friends there. And, obviously Montenegro and Croatia, if anyone's familiar with those areas, those are huge yachting destinations.
Yeah, that's right. All along the Adriatic, right?
Yeah. And so what happened was, so we arrived in the next summer, and we had a magical day with his parents in the capital, Podgorica. And, it's like Rome in the summer. It's just extremely hot. It's hard to breathe. So when we got to our first destination for the summer, which was, we're going to spend a week in Petrovac. It's a beautiful seaside city. Our friend loaned us his condo. we got there and it was huge. So we called his parents and we were trying to convince them to come join us the next day to escape the heat. Everything was just kind of magical, dinner, dancing. It was one of those days where I just felt like, oh my gosh, everything's perfect. But unfortunately, when I woke up the next day, he did not. I woke up to find that he'd passed away in his sleep from a clot.
Oh my gosh. Ugh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
That sort of sudden loss, that sort of sudden trauma is so jarring and so disorienting. I think even if you're in familiar surroundings, what was it like having to deal with your partner's death emotionally and then also like logistically in a brand new place where you just got there?
Well, thankfully, I had, I obviously called his parents. There was a language barrier. They didn't speak much English. I didn't speak much Montenegrin at the time. I called a sister in the States and she was helping organize everything and then obviously flew over. So the good news is like I had his family there. His closest friends lived there and everyone was my support system because I mean, to be honest, I was not really in any emotional state to deal with anything. It was really just, it was basically like there was life one moment, and then the next moment, I was kind of empty. There were some things his family dealt with that I could help them with, retrieving computer files and things like that, paperwork to help them. And his sister she mostly handled his affairs. But as far as like logistics, there was not really much for me to do. And nobody would have put anything on me to do because I was really the person reeling the most from this until I came back to Miami to organize our effects.
Oh man. So what got you through that time? And how long did you stay in Montenegro after your partner passed away? I know you said you came back to Miami, but did you then return to Montenegro or
Yeah, I decided to stay in Europe because I realized I felt better there and it would be easier for me, I thought, to mourn in a place that I'd really wanted to be and a place that he loved. So actually stayed and I made the decision to move to Europe, but I was going to move to live in Serbia half the year and Montenegro half the year, which is what I did for the first 2 years of these almost 7 years in Europe. So I just stayed that whole summer, and he was with the Orthodox Church. So how that works is the mourning system. You kind of have there's a funeral, and then there's like something that 3 days later. There's something after 40 days. So I mean, just being there with his family, part of that, there would be no reason for me to go back to States so soon. And when I came back to Miami after summer, it was really just me organizing my things to move to Serbia and getting rid of his things out of storage, giving things away, and things like that. So it was hard, but it really did help. I think being somewhere where the pace of life was different, and yes, I had a support system, but a lot of things were new. I think in Miami, everything would have reminded me of him.
That's a good point. Yeah. So you're mourning, but you're also building a relationship with a new place at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. What can I ask? Because I know you mentioned before in a previous conversation that you speak Serbo-Croat. How did that come about? Because you chose Serbia, or did you? I'm curious as to how you chose Serbia in addition to Montenegro.
Oh, okay. So Serbo-Croat is like the generally accepted name for the language. All the Balkan countries that were former Yugoslavia, it's not to say that all those countries were not culturally distinct before they became separate nations. That's not actually true. However, everyone called the language Serbo-Croat, and it was one language, with the exception of Slovenia. And so, as all these countries, as they separated from Yugoslavia, they wanted to kind of double down on what makes them unique. So the languages have different names. So technically, I speak all of those languages because there are just very slight variations. How people speak in Bosnia is closer to Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's closer to how people speak in Montenegro. And Serbia, it's just a very slight variation. And the literally, it's usually just like one letter that may or may not be in a word than it is in Montenegro and in Bosnia. And then Croatia is, I think, it's still very similar. It's just very distinct in that they've changed all the months of the year and, some things like that. Some terms like that are completely different, whereas they're not that different in the other languages. I wanted to stay in Montenegro actually, but I was just going off of the advice of friends and they're just kind of convincing me like, oh, you were from New York, you lived in Miami, you're going to be bored living in Montenegro in the off season. It's a very seasonal place. And so I took their advice, but I soon realized that what I wanted to do was actually more for me. Montenegro is more for me. It's a different lifestyle. I think it's something much more similar to like Portugal. Whereas Belgrade, it's like the New York of the Balkans. It's more of I think for me, a place like to spend a weekend. But it was an interesting experience. I would often fly back to Montenegro and visit my friends. And then I, of course, spent the entire summers over in Montenegro.
That sounds lovely, and that's interesting to understand the contrast between Serbia, or at least Belgrade, and then your experience in Montenegro. And it's funny how people will assume that you want a certain thing because you're used to a certain way of living or you've been in a certain location for a while. But sometimes that change in the pace of life is really what you need. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. If you go to a new place and it has such a dramatic effect on you, it's probably because there's something different it has to offer.
so you were there in the Balkans for how long? 7 years? Is that correct?
Almost 6.5 years.
So, what made you decide to return to the US?
My last couple of years in Montenegro, I developed a strong urge to return to the US. And I didn't know where I would live, but LA just kept popping up in very unusual ways. So I had gotten married eventually over there and I was separated with the intent to get divorced. We just didn't rush to the paperwork. So I had a good friend at the time and she was living partially in LA and partially in Montenegro. She's from Montenegro. And she said, well, why don't you come to visit me there? She's like, there's no reason to like not visit. This is a perfect time and this transition. So I agreed to it. I came to LA for 2 months to visit, but as soon as I got off the plane, I was like, oh, I love it. Then I was kind of just making up excuses like why I wouldn't move here. But by the end of my trip, I decided that was that. So I invited my sister to come visit me here. We had a lot of fun. And then she flew with me to Europe and we did a little Balkan tour for her vacation. And then I just organized my things and moved here.
Nice. It's interesting how sometimes you'll have that, I guess, recurring themes will keep coming up, and that can be your sign to go, right? To go try something new. So I was reading your description of the book and your story and how you realized that years later, you were still, I guess, processing the grief from the loss of your partner and that it was maybe holding you back or that you needed to process differently. Can you talk about that a little bit and, how you made that discovery and what you did with it?
Yeah, it was really gradual. A lot of things kind of went wrong after he passed. And besides the obvious kind of, let's say, regressions and like self concept and limiting beliefs, confidence, and things like that. Immediately after he passed, there were things that were a lot more subtle, and it took me a long time to connect the dots. So, in the years that followed, I just kind of was a magnet for these very toxic friendships. I developed several health problems. I kind of struggled with some things in business. And I just couldn't understand why. I was doing everything I could, kind of, just like full efforts, but very little in return, whether you're talking about health problems or business results. So I didn't realize that I just had all this unresolved pain that really set me back. I mean, to be honest, when he passed, I honestly, for a long time, I just didn't really care about anything. It took a while for me to care again. And I realized that because there were things I was afraid of and suddenly I wasn't afraid. And I was like, oh, okay, I just don't actually feel anything. And so that was something in hindsight that it would have been really wise to pay attention to because it was kind of like we had this relationship that everyone admired and they're like, wow. But I realized, I was young and and it was great. But I kind of weaved my own self identity into his.
Yeah, that's a big sign.
So when he was gone, I was like literally like not even a person. That's how I felt, you know? I felt like I was missing something. So that really created this gap where all of these other things happened in my life where it all just kind of rippled out. So it was only until I started making these dramatic changes in my life and every area of my life, almost, at the point where all their health problems reversed, business, all of these things turned around, friendships. It dawned on me one day and it was like, it was as if I walked out of a cloud and I realized, wow, it is only now that I have actually stepped out of this like fog of grief. This was all connected to that time. It was just very apparent to me.
So, did you make a deliberate decision to start doing things differently, or did you just kind of gradually come out of that fog?
It was deliberate, and when I was still in Montenegro, there was a lot that I did, yoga, meditation. Flew to Peru for plant medicine retreat. I was desperate. I just needed change in my life. And no matter what I did, there were certain, I'm not going to say nothing worked. Everything worked to certain degrees, but I think that base of just like not being, having those limiting beliefs and not having enough self-love, that was really what I really needed to work on the most. So nothing, there would be change, but not that much. So when I moved to LA, it helped, just like a new environment and new start. And then I realized, oh, I have this like long term toxic friendship. So I ended that friendship and then I got into, similar patterns. And then after the last pattern, I was like, oh, okay. And suddenly saw everything clearly. It became my life's work to just like change. And I went, full speed ahead into reading so many different things. I went to meditation retreat. I started meditating like several hours a day, this advanced meditation retreat. I did all these different things. And it's very interesting. I had this urgency, Casey, that was like, I felt like I needed to change as soon as possible, as if my life depended on it, which sounds so dramatic. But when I think about like, all the allergies and all those problems I had from that grief, in a way, it is true. My life did depend on it. And suddenly everything in my life started turning around, literally everything. So it was a dedicated effort, but it was interesting that I put so much effort for a decade beforehand. And that wasn't it because I hadn't gotten that base. So everything else was kind of a Band-Aid effect.
Yeah, you had to dig down to the core of what was underneath it. Like, as you said, limiting beliefs and things like that. If it's not too personal, what were some of those limiting beliefs?
That's a great question. One, I thought I was not good. Let's say that I'm not good. That would be my biggest one from childhood because, I'm a recovering perfectionist. I had this thing that like the one thing I would always be praised for as a child and anything I've done like misbehaving would be like ignored if I came home with my straight A's. So I always had this thing in me that like I'm not good or that I'm not good enough. And it's a strange thing to have as an adult. So, but it ties into, let's say, the business struggles I'd had during those years because I would just keep putting, my foot to the gas and like delivering great results, but I was barely moving the needle because deep down I didn't really actually think I deserved to succeed.
I feel like that's really common, especially for people with perfectionistic tendencies or who received lots of attention for, I guess, external accomplishments, lots of external validation. As kids, I think it's easy to grow up thinking that it's all about what you deliver and not about who you are, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a distinct funny memory as a child. It's funny in hindsight, but it was not the first time where I forgot my homework assignments or I just didn't know what I was supposed to do. And it was just like, Casey, I broke down into tears, crying on the living room floor. And everyone's like, okay, like trying to console me. And I was like literally projecting into the future in elementary school. I was like, well, now I'm not going to get into the college I want. He's like, what are you talking about? So yeah, it's really interesting. And because we all have something like that, I think, from childhood, whether it comes from like a real place or not. And it's interesting how we can carry that forward.
Yeah, oh man. I mean, it's funny, but it's also not funny, the fact that as a child, you're already like catastrophizing your future. But that's also, I think a lot of people will relate to that. So tell us about the core message of your book and who it's for and what you hope readers will get from it.
Yeah. So my book is Dream On: How to Create the New Life of Your Dreams After Upheaval or Loss. It's a book about reconnecting to joy. It's about realizing that there's always another dream to be had, no matter what might have happened along the way. So you can come back from any tragedy, you can come back from a lost career or a business that didn't succeed. You can come back from a health crisis, a natural disaster, and there's always a time to grieve. And that's super important that we don't sweep things under the rug, that we just feel what we need to feel. But there's also this really pivotal point after that initial stage of grief that we have to be able to form a really clear picture of exactly what's going on with us, exactly where we stand, so that we can truly heal. At that point, we're able to have the power to properly reinvent ourselves with a solid foundation. What happens a lot of times is, like what happened with me, is that I got to a point where I felt like, okay, I'm not grieving because, like, none of the dramatic, let's say, symptoms of grief were there, but that wasn't actually true. So my baseline of like, oh, this is my life kind of decreased, or it paled to what it was before. And I thought like, oh, I'm at 100%, and I wasn't. So it's just about helping people on this journey, because it took me a very long time. And I realized grief is a process. Everyone's going to need different amounts of time, but there's absolutely no reason anyone needs to spend that much time not living to the maximum.
Yeah. It can be really easy to get stuck in the grieving process, right? Or like you said, to think that your new normal is just like dimmer or at a lower level than it was before, and maybe attribute that to something else. So it's an important message that people need to hear.
Thank you.
I got to ask, how long did it take you to write the book?
It was really fast. For the time I started writing it, a little over a year, but there were a few months when I wasn't writing. So yeah, it was fast. It's kind of one of those things where one day it just struck me like, oh, I have this book to write and I need to write it now. So I had some new limiting beliefs to get over, which is why it actually took me that long, why I took a break to write it. But yeah, it was pretty much a thing that kind of flowed.
Nice, nice. Well, it's coming out in June and I'm looking forward to reading it. And I wanted to shift gears a little bit because a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast are people who are thinking about moving to Europe. Maybe it's still like, at the daydream stage for them. Maybe they're trying to decide among countries, and for most people in that situation, especially if they don't have a partner or family who are already in Europe or from Europe, they want to be as prepared as possible. So, do you have any recommendations for people who are thinking about moving to Europe? I'd like to start with like the value of learning at least some of the local language before moving overseas. That's one of those, it's like a classic recommendation and it's a good one, but I see so many people who are like, "Oh, I'll start learning when I get there." I mean, what's your take on that and what would you suggest? What would you gently recommend to people if they're thinking of moving to a country with a different language?
There are a few ways to approach this. I definitely recommend starting to learn the language beforehand, just because learning a language, I'm sure you've noticed, Casey, there's like a cumulative effect. So if you arrive somewhere and you already have a basic vocabulary, you'd be surprised to see how quickly your skills advance, just you're kind of picking things up subconsciously and also consciously, and you are reinforcing your vocabulary. When you go there just starting from square one, it's just a different experience. I don't, it can't hurt.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I've noticed that here, and my Portuguese was really bad when I got here. Like, I was not aware of how bad it was, which is probably good. The pronunciation and listening comprehension are super difficult, but I think the fact that I was making an effort made a difference in my interactions. And I've heard that from lots of other people too. That like if you're
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, whether you learn to speak a language, start learning before you move there or not, I can't recommend that enough. Besides, on this theme of helping someone in an emergency, it's just a great sign of respect. And, I understand not everyone has the interest or maybe the headspace to like okay, I'm going to become fluent in this language or the time. That's fine, but at least learn the basics because people really value that effort. People engage with you differently when they see that you have taken the time to get to know that part of their culture and that you're interested in them. And they'll be like quicker to accept you into their community or, to engage with you in whichever other ways. I think it's great that as Americans, we have expat communities around the world. But I think a lot of people from the US and the UK make the mistake of just staying with each other and kind of isolating themselves. So when you can offer even just a few sentences in someone's languages, it just creates a completely different dynamic.
Absolutely. And this is something, I mean, when your partner passed, you had his family there. And, obviously that was like a very rare and unfortunate experience or situation. But do you have any recommendations based on your experience living abroad and everything you went through about like how should people prepare for the possibility of something going wrong? I mean, obviously, when you're preparing to move abroad, that's not what you want to have at the top of your mind. But what do you recommend people do so that they can at least handle it in the moment if something unexpected comes up?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's definitely nothing I thought of at the time. But things that I've learned along the way from that experience and just from living abroad for so long is that you'd be surprised. Like, for example, the emergency number, something that basic. We're so used to 911. It is not 911, but. And I think a lot of countries in Europe share the same emergency number, but just knowing these nuances, it's super important. Also knowing what are the names of the services, because, sometimes countries have different names for different aspects of like medical care, medical services that you would think it would be all called the same name. So just kind of getting a quick rundown of like, okay, what are the names and keeping that information. Also, I can't like stress the importance of leaning on the American embassy enough. I only had to engage with them a little bit after Bodo's death, but I did lean on them at other times later on. And it's just really mind blowing how fast, thorough, effective, and empathetic they are. They really prioritize taking care of US citizens, and it is just wild what they can get done in any amount of time. So I would definitely, in any emergency situation or even just a major life change, the birth of a child, or you're getting married, anything like that, I would definitely lean on my local embassy.
That's good to know. Yeah, I think a lot of people, they only go to the embassy if they have like a document problem and they forget that there's other kinds of support that the embassy can provide if you need it.
Right. And even if you're just traveling somewhere unfamiliar or traveling to try a place out before you move there, I'd also highly recommend signing up for the U.S. Department of State travel advisories. You can sign up at travel.state.gov. I was a little skeptical, to be honest, because I felt like I had this super insider's view to the Balkans. But when I went to their websites to read the descriptions, they update their descriptions regularly for every country in the world. And when I read the nuances for different countries, I was like, wow, this is like up to the minute, completely accurate. So I signed up. And what happened was, Bulgaria is a country that's always had a lot of protests. And I lived in the direct city center. So a lot of them would pass around me. So these email alerts were great. I would get email alerts from the Department of State. And so I would know there's going to be this big protest about XYZ on these streets on this date and this time. So I would be able to avoid anything that could, potentially be a very either, traffic heavy or even hairy situation. Or even if there's a football match that they realize, okay, these fans tend to be a little bit more ardent. That's great to know. They're like, it's going to happen at this in this stadium and the celebrations will probably be between this time and this time. So you can completely organize your life. And I never unsubscribed because I was getting those emails that, to an address that I stopped using when I moved to the States. And I happened to notice during the pandemic, even though I moved to LA, that I actually got emails from the Department of State that were directing U.S. citizens, helping them to get on the last 2 planes to the U.S., like complimentary flights back to the U.S. So, I mean, it is that granular and that, like, profound. I highly recommend anyone sign up.
Oh, okay. Now I'm gonna go sign up for mine for Portugal because I didn't realize that they were that detailed and that it's almost like a news feed.
It's incredible.
So that sounds like an incredible resource. That's good to know. Can we talk about life in Montenegro? Can you, for people who haven't been there, maybe aren't familiar with life in the Balkans, talk about like what that was like and what attracted you and what drew you to stay there? Like, what's awesome about Montenegro and Serbia?
I will speak about Montenegro because that's my great love. It has a place in my soul for so many reasons, and it's always going to be my second home. And in many ways, the people there, not just like friends or not just but as family, and they really accepted me as like an honorary Montenegrin citizen. And that's just something that will always be like profoundly beautiful for me. So if you have never been there or you don't know much about it, there are just so many reasons to visit. It is a teeny tiny country, but it is a jewel. It is wealthy by all naturally abundant standards. There are like gorgeous beaches of all different kinds, from white sand beaches to, pebbles, whatever you want. You have coves and great areas for diving. The beaches are a short drive away from ski centers, although it's the same thing to be said about Southern California, but it's just like gorgeous. You have salt flats and lakes, it's really dramatic, dark green forests. It is just absolutely gorgeous. If you love the outdoors, there's just so much you can do. It's also a kind of like, you can compare it to a little bit like Monaco, on some areas of the seafront. There are two super yacht marinas that have like complete villages and international schools, restaurants, whatever you want. And it's also like a country with low taxes. And I believe fuel is still tax free. So you have a lot of people from Italy and the UK. They birth their yachts there. So there's a very international community there, not just among the yachting set. Now, there were not many people living from other countries in Montenegro when I was living there. But since actually the pandemic, people have moved from all over. And it was very interesting. My last trip there, I was shocked to hear how many people are speaking English. And there were people from like all over, like the population kind of exploded. But there's just so much to enjoy. The lifestyle is similar to what you're going to find in Italy. Things are a lot more laid back. Might be a little hard to get things done, paperwork, how long things take compared to the US, but there's a quality of life's amazing. And I lived in the capital, Podgorica, which is a lot of fun. And longer than that, I lived in Kotor, which is, this charming seaside city. It's on the Bay of Kotor, which is actually unusual. Not the bay is the Adriatic Sea. So it's a saltwater bay. And it is a UNESCO protected bay. Most of the buildings that are like lining the bay are UNESCO protected, as well as the old town. And it is an hour's drive from Dubrovnik. So it's really easy to get around. You can also take, a boat or a ferry to go to Bari, Italy, very easily from Montenegro. It's very easy to get to a lot of places. Albania is next door. It's just really gorgeous. Yeah, I can go on about this for a while, so I will stop there.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. The pictures I've seen are mostly concentrated on the beachfront, but you can see like the beautiful green hills and the mountains in the background, and it does look like a jewel. So maybe based on your book and your experience, for listeners who are maybe dealing with their own grief or anxiety or stress right now, and they might want to make a move, but they may be going through some things. What's the message about getting through that so that you can create the life you want?
Well, I'll just say this. It's not just about these bigger tragedies and losses. We all kind of collect some bits of pain and things that need to be taken care of over the years. If you're just like not satisfied in your life, when you move, there might be a slight improvement because you're in a new environment, but chances are you're still going to have the same kind of limit. So no matter what you're going to do next or where you're deciding to go, I just can't recommend enough the importance of taking care of any unresolved grief, anxiety, or fear. It's just always going to put a ceiling on, your ability to form and sustain meaningful relationships. It's going to put a cap on your financial success, your ability to heal, your ability to be creative and enjoy life. So what better time to really, buckle down and turn the ship around than to for this exciting chapter of calling a new place home. So no matter what your goals are or why you're moving to that new country, it's just a great idea to work on these stories, change the stories you've been telling yourself. And it's always going to be, it's always going to call for a certain level of effort. But when you look at how much you can gain from it, it's really much more than worth it. Your ability to expand, to trust, and to grow. And why not combine that whole dream together and say, okay, I love country X, or I might want to move to country Z. Okay, great. Why don't you just kind of hit it out of the park?
I love that. I love that. Yeah, set yourself up for success, right? Do the inner work so that you can make the most of all the effort you put into moving. Chanoa Inez, thank you so much for talking with us today. In the show notes, we will have links for your book, Dream On: How to Create the New Life of Your Dreams After Upheaval or Loss. And just thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your recommendations.
Thank you so much for having me, Casey. It was great to speak with you. And I just have to say that I'm loving your photos and your newsletter.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. I see there's a new edition. I'll be reading that later today.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. That's all for now. Thank you for listening to We're Moving to Europe, a podcast for Americans who are curious and or serious about relocating to a European country. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. Our producer and editor is Magdalena Lass, and our music was composed by Sage Barton. For more resources and to join the conversation, connect with us on Substack at We're Moving to Europe.